Call me now.
It's the Ed Bernstein Show, Home Edition. Now, here's your host, Ed Bernstein.
Hi, I'm Ed Bernstein, and welcome to our show. You know, how many times do we think about how wonderful it would be to make a film that's significant to us, about our family, about one of our parents, about a grandparent? Well, these two gentlemen have done it. And the name of the film is A Promise to Our Fathers. It's Gene Greenberg and Larry Pollard. And it's both of them had fathers that were involved in the Holocaust. And there obviously, a lot of years have gone by. And Gene, maybe you can talk about how this got off the ground.
Sure. I've growing up in a family of parents that were two Holocaust survivors. I'd always wanted to tell their story, and with my background, telling it on film was a lot more appealing to me than trying to write a book. But I never really had a good reason to do the film because I wanted something that would make the story I told different than every other Holocaust story that's out there. Now, then along came Larry, who Larry and I grew up together. Our backyards touched, and we just spent a lot of time together. And a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, Larry contacted me about a library that his dad was putting together in his veterans home in Cameron, Missouri, which is a very rural part of the state. As we were talking, he told me something that I never knew during the whole time we were growing up, and really Larry didn't know until pretty recently, that his father, who was a medic in World War II, was involved in the liberation of a concentration camp. And that was the reason, really, one of the reasons for the library.
When I contacted Gene, of course, I never forgot the story he told me when we were 2 9-year-old boys about his parents.
Well, what was that story, Larry? What is that story?
Well, we moved a lot when I was a kid, and we moved into a neighborhood in Kansas City. And of course, the first thing I did was jump on my bicycle and start riding around till I could find somebody my age. And after a couple of trips around the block, there were these 2 guys in the front yard tossing a football around. And Gene being one of them, he said, "Hey, do you want to play some football?" And that I was absolutely, and that's how I got started. And we realized that, our backyards did connect. We just became best buddies. I mean, we played sports together. We did about everything together. And so, of course, all these years I remembered, I always remembered the story of his parents. And my father, who had moved in 2016 to the veterans home, started this library. And then when I was telling Gene about it, he and his brother Stan came back for the dedication of the library once it opened. And this whole thing just kind of grew from there. He had a cameraman with him, and we did a lot of taping, and we got together 2 or 3 times, probably taped or filmed over 20 hours of film altogether. And so my dad ended up being a big part of it. He loved Gene. Gene was like another son. And I'm not so sure that maybe Gene was maybe the favorite son sometimes. But anyway, that's how the whole thing kind of came together. And it was like a snowball going down a big hill. And that's how the film came about.
Maybe this would be a good time for us to show the trailer of the film.
The young people need to know what is happening. I'm not being an old maid or an old man when I tell you, but it could happen again.
If the war went on one day longer, Stan and I might not be here. But you GIs, you men that fought, we owe everything.
They immediately put those two sons to death.
The story of the Holocaust that you told me, never forgot it.
A hero and a veteran tells them our parents' story.
No words.
Promise me that these stories won't die, that you'll keep my stories alive. We've made a promise to our fathers to do this.
So, Gene, can you talk a little bit about what you know about your father's experience during the Holocaust?
Sure. Both my parents were survivors. They grew up in a place in Poland called Lodz, Poland, which is really the second largest city in Poland, had the second largest Jewish population. When my dad was a tailor, my mom was, assisted and was a dressmaker and worked with him in the tailor shop. When the war broke out, and of course the Nazis came in, they conquered Lodz in 8 days, and soon after that, the Jews were all herded into the Lodz ghetto. My parents spent from 1940, from about May of 1940 to August of 1944 in the Lodz ghetto, and they survived that long, which was quite amazing. They also had 2 sons my brothers that were in the Lodz ghetto with them. And when the Lodz ghetto was liquidated in August of 1944, my parents were among some of the last transports from the Lodz ghetto to Auschwitz. When they arrived at Auschwitz, the selection happens, and the men and women are divided, and the kids are divided. And at that point, the whole family was separated. And their 2 sons, my 2 brothers, who were 14 and 12, I think, at that point, went right to the gas chambers. My dad survived in Auschwitz till the liberation. My mom had gotten transferred from Auschwitz, and they moved her to Bergen-Belsen, and then Braunschweig, and she was liberated from Braunschweig in around April of 1945. So there was a good 5-month period there where my dad went back to Lodz, but he was convinced my mom had died in the camps, and it wasn't till 5 months later or so, or a little more than that, that he got word that she was still alive. And miraculously, they reunited in a displaced persons camp in Salzheim, and were able to come to America.
You'd like to have been a fly on the wall during that meeting. Larry, at that time when Gene's family was going through that, what was going on with your family?
My father was in the 819th Medical Air Evacuation Unit of the Army, combat medic. He was at all the major campaigns. They tried to remove wounded, either get them to a field hospital or, if need be, on a flight to someplace that was a little bit safer. It was the end of the war, basically in Europe, and Dad was waiting on orders, figured he'd probably end up going to the Pacific somewhere. And the 7th Army, on their march to Munich, I believe, came across Dachau. And of course, they needed some more people to help. They contacted my father's commanding officer, and he picked 3 of the medics and sent them to Dachau. And that's how my father got involved as far as the Holocaust goes. And the crazy thing about it, of all the things he would talk about, and he was a talker and he loved to write, he would talk around Dachau. You could never get details from him about his time at Dachau. And last April 2020, he wrote about his time at Dachau and just kind of put it away. He passed away in October of 2020. And shortly after that, they sent me all of his belongings, and I started sorting everything out and going through things. And I found what he wrote about Dachau. And of course, the documentary was completed by that time, but I scanned the paperwork and sent it to Gene, and Gene said, this has got to be included. You know, he opened up and talked about his time at Dachau and what he witnessed. So we filmed a reading of that paper, and it'll be added to the documentary.
So when you started the documentary, Larry, it originated from an idea having to do with the library that you were creating at the Veterans Museum?
Yes, I mean, I believe that's part of it. Yeah. My father, for I know the last 10 years, was his focus was on the Holocaust. Well, World War II, but specifically the Holocaust. He kept telling me, he said, Larry, this is not being taught. It's not being taught in schools. And he said, it's going to be forgotten about. And that's why he started the library. And matter of fact, to this day, it's the only library of its kind in any veteran home clear across the United States. And he started getting books. They outgrew the original room, went to a bigger room. And it's my understanding they're going to have to expand that room now. But that was his whole thing. And before they shut down the veterans home due to COVID-19, he was giving speeches and interviews. Classes were coming in, students anywhere from 5th grade up to college age. And he was speaking to them and telling them about the Holocaust, what a terrible time it was, and wanted all of them to carry that message on. So that was how, that was the reason why the library actually got started. But I really think, like Gene said earlier, I truly believe that he always wanted to tell a story. And thank goodness he filmed his parents back when he did. That is, to me, some of the most powerful part of the documentary. And I don't know, maybe that jump-started Gene a little bit, just, being at the library and seeing what Dad was trying to do. But that's how this whole thing kind of came together then.
When did you start the filming your parents, Gene?
Boy, this probably 1979, 1980. And my parents were visiting here in Las Vegas. And I got a hold of probably one of the very first home video cameras that were out there. And I just had my parents sit down and I turned the camera on and just asked them to start talking.
Dad was fortunate in a way because he was a tailor and a very skilled tailor. And he had a pretty good-sized tailor shop in Lodge before the war.
In this tailor shop, all of those people that have been working for me before the war, I have to bring them in that shop. We finished all of this material, what we had left over. And then it was a little bit quiet, but we have worked in the ghetto, but we don't get no money, no paid.
The Lodge Ghetto became one of the largest suppliers of Nazi goods, uniforms, boots, coats, clothing for the German civilians and officers' wives and all that were all manufactured in the Lodge Ghetto.
I am so glad I did that. It's some valuable video, and it's there for my grandkids. I mean, boy, I tell you, it's not the whole story, and probably if I was doing it today, I'd do a lot of what you're doing, Ed, and I would be asking questions and trying to probe a little bit deeper into some of the areas. But it was just them with the camera rolling.
Well, sometimes you do that, you interrupt the flow, and the result's not as good. So talk about how you put these pieces together and actually started to make a documentary out of it.
Well, we had the video of my parents, and we started really there to do a core. We transcribed all their words, and got that. Then when we went back to Cameron for the dedication of the library, and I had no idea what that event was going to be, but we arranged for someone to come with us to the dedication and shoot some film there, or tape. Mm-hmm. Which then gave us another piece of the puzzle. When we had all of that, when we had my parents' story, we had the library story, we were still missing a few pieces. Really, Larry and my story about what, our role in all this and what happened. And also my brother had a little piece of this. So we just went back to Cameron and took a larger film crew with us this time and spent the day shooting in Cameron. Then we decided to go back to Kansas City, in the neighborhood Larry and I grew up in. And we spent a half a day shooting pretty much in front of the house I grew up in to get the final part of it. And then with a good director and good editing, everything just came together nicely, and we're able to, as any Holocaust story should, we're able to weave in a message about anti-Semitism and all. And Bill's dad, unprompted, just gave us, he just sat there and he said, listen, I want to tell you, I think he said, don't think I'm being an old maid or an old man when I tell you it could happen again. And it just tied everything in very nicely to give us what we think is a powerful movie, which from the feedback we've gotten and the reviews we've gotten, we're very pleased with what we have. And I want to say we did this as a nonprofit. We weren't looking to make anything on this. We want this to be in schools. We want kids to be able to see it. We want it to be used at organizations. So we have no licensing fees on the film. We tied in with Jewish Nevada. And so people who contributed to the film contributed to Jewish Nevada, and that way we were able to keep we didn't have to go through all the nonprofit stuff. People were able to make a tax deductible contribution to the film, and it helped Jewish Nevada, helped us, and we got this done.
I suspect if a number of years ago, if I was doing a TV interview with Steven Spielberg, he would be giving me kind of the same message that the two of you are giving, that you have these stories that you know of. You don't want people to forget. You want them to become part of the educational process, part of history. And it goes a long way. I mean, it's the same motivation that Spielberg has. So you're in a good company there. Now I know, Gene, you've been back to concentration camps as an adult, right? Didn't you go a number of years ago? Larry, have you been back to Dachau? Or?
No, I haven't. My wife has, though.
No. What was that experience like for you, Gene?
Boy, it was it was a tough day. I happened to have gone to Auschwitz on my birthday in I think 1988. And it was the 45th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And it was a tough day for me. It was a very tough day. Auschwitz, and I've made this comment before, when we went through Auschwitz, it's a museum today. And I had a real trouble connecting with my parents' experience while I was in Auschwitz. But then we took that short trip from Auschwitz to the death camp and Birkenau, and all of a sudden it all came down when we saw the crematorium, and we saw the pits of ashes, and we walked into a barracks that had been untouched. It was a very, very tough experience for me. One thing I was able to do that I appreciated, I stood over one of the pits of ashes and was able to say Kaddish for my two brothers, something that's no one's ever been able to do that for them. And I'm glad I went, and it's very likely that when all the COVID restrictions and everything open up, I'll probably go back. And I'd probably like to take Larry with me.
Yeah. Kaddish being the Jewish prayer that you recite for the dead. You took this film around to different film festivals, right? What was that experience like? What was the reaction you got? I mean, how do you go about doing that?
Well, unfortunately, we premiered it at the Las Vegas Film Festival.
Right.
And which was the end of January of 2020. And then a few weeks later, everything shut down. So film festivals canceled. Now, a few of them have come back and are doing some virtual festivals. But we've presented at one, the Twin Cities Jewish Film Festival, but other than that, unfortunately, our timing wasn't very good on this. So we're now really focusing on schools and education and getting it out there. I know the Toledo, Ohio Jewish Federation is showing our film at this year's Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so we're taking that. We're kind of done with the film festivals.
Okay, well, look, I mean, we're going to show a little bit of it here.
Why does your dad have numbers tattooed on his arm? And we were at your house.
Right.
And he started to tell me the story of the Holocaust, which I really knew nothing about. And he disappeared into, I assume, your mom and dad's room, but brought out pictures of Samuel and Simon and told me all about them and told me, and I just, I couldn't believe this kind of stuff really happened, And of course, I knew my dad had been in the war and also been back to Korea, but, you know, he never really talked about anything like that before. So, excuse me. The story of the Holocaust that you told me, never forgot it.
I know in Nevada, Larry, I'm sure you're aware that Gene is, you know, very, very active in creating these kind of programs. We had a friend of Gene's, Edith Katz, who got these classes into the school district here in the state of Nevada, and Gene's been very active in that, and we have a good system here in Nevada in getting this message out about this part of our history, and hopefully your neck of the woods are doing some of that work as well.
My daughter, who is a teacher at Princeton, Missouri High School, and actually that's where my father graduated from as well, she was given an opportunity at a block class for this year, and with whatever she wanted to choose to teach. So it was an easy decision for her. She picked the Holocaust. And so that's what she's been doing. And she's been using the documentary, and it's been extremely successful. And of course, Gene and I, and that's what we want to get accomplished in every school all over the world.
Where can somebody purchase or view the film?
Well, those are being set up now. So
Okay.
Right now, probably the best way is to contact
our office, and we'll figure it out for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the DVD will be coming out in a few weeks, and the DVD will have the special feature of what we call the Dachau letter.
Terrific. And look, it's name of the film is A Promise to Our Fathers, and Gene Greenberg, Larry Pollard, you have certainly kept that promise. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Ed.
Okay, thanks, Ed.
You're welcome. See you next week.
My daughter Dana fought a long battle with Crohn's disease before passing last year. Max has spent a lifetime scoring goals.
It's our goal to help the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation find a cure for this horrible disease, so no one else's child has to suffer like Dana did.
Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis may be unfamiliar to you, but there are currently over 3 million Americans suffering from both. Join Max and I in scoring our goal to find a cure.